Hi, I'm Richard Rogers, and I absolutely hope that you enjoy today's spiritual message. You know, we at Unity of Phoenix Spiritual Center are committed to helping people live better lives. We're going to provide you tools over and over, spiritual tools that allow you to live your best possible life. And if you want to leave a donation to continue to allow the work that we do to support other people just like you, we say thank you. Thank you for your generosity, because this ministry is committed to making the world a better place. So, the question that I have for you today, because I'm doing this series, so you want to be spiritual, right? And I really want to kind of break it down, because sometimes we use that when we say to other people, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, right? Have you ever got an attitude about that where you said to somebody, I'm not religious, you can tell. Can you see my wings? I'm spiritual, right? But if we're going to use that term, I want us to really address what it means, right? Because there's some expectations that if you're going to claim yourself as spiritual, that you're actually going to live a spiritual life, right? Because living a spiritual life is much easier to say than to do, right? Like things like forgiveness and, has everybody found that forgiveness is easier to talk about than it is to actually do, right? So there's things that when you get to a spiritual life that are actually hard, right? That it's a spiritual challenge, that it's actually inner work. And we have to do it if we're really going to keep saying, I'm spiritual, then we ought to actually be living a spiritual life. Are you willing to go that far with me? So the question that I have for you today is, how do you grow your soul? Right? How do you transform consciousness? Because if we're here to as a spiritual being, then the idea is that we are here to progress in our expression of God. Is that true? So that ideally, as we move through this life experience, we're expressing more and more God, right? So how are you growing your soul? How are you doing it? Give me one. Somebody give me a way you think you're growing your soul. Meditation. Practice, okay? Somebody else give me one. Prayer. Coming here. Breathing. Okay, listening. Great. What else? Somebody else give me one. Keeping your heart open. Okay? So I want you to hear all the ways that you're committed to expanding your soul. True? Okay, now let's look at this I want to take it one more step back. Now, in Unity, we have an understanding of two things, right? Spirit and soul. Now, sometimes we use these terms interchangeably. But in Unity, are they the same thing? I got two negative hand waves over there, right? So when you think of spirit and when you think of soul in you, what do you think of? Right? So in Unity, we think of spirit as what? An expression of God. Right? So spirit is the place in you, the aspect of you that is expressing God. Right? That we're created in the image and likeness of God. Right? That's your spirit. Now, if that's your spirit, then what's your soul? Well, I don't know. Right? So your soul is the way that you personally express spirit. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm going to draw a little thing. So this is your spirit. Okay, this is your soul. Can you get it on camera? And this is your body and the three-dimensional world. Okay? So is your spirit light? Yes, right? It's light. It's the light of God. So your spirit shines through your soul, right? And what happens when your spirit shines through your soul? You get to see yourself reflected all around you. Yay! Now, How many times have you had somebody in your life that you didn't really appreciate the way they were reflecting back at you? Did you want to kind of wipe them off or shine them up or get them to reflect you in a different way? But the idea is that your spirit is pure God, your spirit is pure light, and your soul is your process of mastering that or expressing that or demonstrating that. Your soul is your consciousness knowing your oneness with God, right? So your soul is almost synonymous with consciousness, with your current belief system, right? So this is where your belief system is, right? So, yeah, true, huh? Right? So what we want to do tonight is I want you to look at how do we grow that soul? Because one of the things I've been teaching the last 2 years, really consistently, is that your soul only does one of two things. Do you remember what I've been saying? It's either, I love it, you're doing it already, right? It's either expanding or contracting, right? That's all your soul does. And when it expands, does it reflect more light? Yes, it just does. Like when your soul expands, it is expressing more and more God, it's expressing more and more light. And when it contracts, that expression gets more and more weird. Okay. You can't say that about your soul. I know sometimes my soul gets weird. Okay, so we're going to go to Scripture. Matthew 13, 31 and 32. Another parable he put before them and said, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in a field, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it is grown, it becomes the greatest of herbs and becomes a tree, so that birds of the air can come and lodge in it within its branches. Okay? Now, what the heck's he talking about? Right? So the mustard seed, Jesus took a mustard seed and said, the mustard seed, have you ever seen a mustard seed? Right? You got a mustard seed? Great. A mustard seed is the smallest of all seeds. I mean, it's tiny, right? It's very tiny. And it becomes, if you've ever seen, especially in the Middle East, if you've ever seen a mustard plant fully grown, it's about the size of an RV. I mean, it's actually huge, right? So you get this little seed that actually becomes the size of an RV. It becomes huge. Now, what's the spiritual significance of that? What? Say it louder. The growth of your soul. Great. So, but I want you to really hear that it actually talks about the way our soul grows. So there's your soul, right? And let's just take any spiritual idea, okay? Somebody give me a spiritual idea. Love, great. Love's a great one. Now, when you started talking about love, maybe, how old do you think you were? Maybe a kid, and you were talking about your parents, or maybe you fell in love in elementary school, you had a little crush on somebody in elementary school. So when we start talking about love, we have this understanding of love, and it's a pretty simplistic idea. True? It's pretty simplistic. It's pretty small, right? It's this little idea of love, right? But what we know about any spiritual idea, especially any divine idea, that the more that we focus on it, the bigger that idea becomes. Is that true? Right? So does your understanding of God or love or any of the spiritual ideas, has that grown as you have spiritually matured? Right, great. So here's the whole point. Any idea of God, as you begin to dwell on it, meditate on it, think about it, actually engage it, ask the Holy Spirit to evolve that idea within you, that idea actually becomes so big that your soul has to expand to hold it. Like, does everybody remember their first little crush? right? And it was so wonderful, or it was so tragic, whatever it was for you, right? Did everybody just have a tragic little crush at one point? Right? A tragic little crush. So you have a tragic little crush, but something happens in that tragic little crush that you actually become bigger because of it. You find out that as painful as it was, as awful as it was, I lived through it. Now, there were two things that happened when you lived through that pain. Either you closed your heart, or you realized you could keep your heart open and that you could actually open to more love than you've ever known before. Did everybody have a breakup that was so painful that for a length of time you just went around with a closed heart? Great. How'd that feel? Right? So you actually think you're winning, right? When your heart is closed, because it feels like, oh, I can't get hurt again, right? But the other problem is, I'm not really feeling anything anymore, right? So that really wasn't a win because you weren't bringing the best of you to any moment. You weren't actually being the best version of you. That you don't really win until you have an experience that actually makes you larger so that you can open up your heart. And so over and over again, what I want you to see is that what Jesus taught with a mustard seed was the power of your soul when you entertain any spiritual idea. That the more you meditate, the more you focus, the more you study it, the more you work with any spiritual idea, it absolutely becomes as big as God. Because we're not done with love until we see love as big as God. But the only way we can see it as big as God is what happens to our soul. Our soul has to become huge to hold that spiritual idea. See, to be spiritual means that you're always embracing something that always looks bigger than you. And there's a part of us in our humanity that wants to manage our spiritual life. It's like, okay, so love should be this big. My abundance should be this big. My relationship, my family should be this big, right? We want to manage all these things. Because does your ego feel safer when you're trying to manage all the details of your life? Yes, but that's not what your soul's here for. You're here to grow a soul that's so big that it can entertain or hold the fullness of God. So would this room be big enough for your soul? No. Now you think about, wow, that'd be kind of weird walking around here with a soul that big, right? But what would happen? What would happen if you actually expanded your soul to be as big as this room? What would happen if you expanded your soul to be as big as the planet? How big a spiritual presence do you want to be in the world? There's stories that people came up to Jesus and they didn't even get close, or they just got close to him. And they were healed. Because was his consciousness defined by the size of his body? No, his consciousness was enormous. What I want you to see is every spiritual idea looks so small. It looks small until you actually let it in and begin to work with it. Begin to entertain it. Begin to allow it to transform you. And it's kind of a trick. It's kind of a bait and switch. You know what a bait and switch is? Where they sell one thing, but they're really selling you not the nice one. They're selling you the crummy washer. You know, you go in and you think, well, it's $2.95. I want that one. Well, you're not getting that one. You're getting the one that's 6 months old. It doesn't have any more belts, right? Right? So the reality is we call forth love in our life because we think we can manage it. Because we think we can get our arms around it. Because we think we can master it. But what really happens
is it just has its way with us. And as soon as we think we've got it all figured out, it wants to push us even further out. And it wants to make us bigger and bigger and bigger, that the smallest seed, the smallest spiritual idea creates the biggest bush. So spiritually, since this is what we're talking about tonight, where are you getting pushed? And you think, nowhere, Richard, I got it all under control. Then you're not doing it right. Right? Because I want you to really see, I guarantee there's at least one area in your life right now where you took on a little spiritual idea, a little concept, a little thing, and now as you actually lay hold of it, it is creating havoc in your life. Because you wanted it to be cute and adorable and sit on a shelf, and it said, oh no, I'm going to own this house. Like, I don't go on the shelf anymore. I'm actually bigger than your house. I'm the biggest thing in your life. And when you get stretched that far, as a spiritual being, you're supposed to say yes. Like, was there something I signed when I said I was spiritual that I knew what I was signing up for? No. Right? So when the disciples came to Jesus and he offered them a different life, did any of them know what they were signing up for before? Would any of them probably signed up if they knew what they were signing up for? No, right? But there was something in their soul that wasn't satisfied at playing small. And even though their ego or their consciousness didn't know everything that was going to happen, there was something inside of them that said, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to be pushed out. And then over and over again, when you read these parables, I hope what you see is a level of abundance. You know, the parable of turning the water into wine. You know, it was 20 jugs. It was 6 jugs, but each one of them had 20 to 30 gallons of water in them. It was 160 gallons of wine. Have you ever been to a party with 160 gallons of wine? I mean, I don't know how you do that, right? You know, I just never, you know, if I got a bottle of red and a bottle of wine, I think I'm a sport, you know? 160 gallons of wine. That over and over again, what I want you to see is that Spirit has so much spiritual abundance for you, and that it's transforming everything. How many of you have heard of the idea that's very common now in business about a disruptive idea? Anybody heard that concept, right? It used to be called a paradigm shift. How many of you have heard the idea of a paradigm shift, right? Now it's called the disruptive idea. And I'm going to read an article from the website Mashable. In 1903, John Stahl was having dinner with some friends at a trendy restaurant in San Francisco when the discussion turned to what is called a disruptive business idea. Suggestions were flying left and right, and at one point someone asked, how crazy would it be if a company started selling socks that didn't match? Right? Because the whole conversation is what idea could be so disruptive to the status quo that it would change things. Everyone thought it was a terrible idea. Not practical, certainly not useful. No one would buy in, so they moved on. Everyone except for John, who couldn't get the idea of mismatched socks out of his head. In his view, the sock category was lazy and boring. How many of you have boring socks on right now? All right, lazy and boring. Couldn't get out of his head that we were still buying and wearing socks the same way we had for decades. And how many times have you lost one sock and had to toss its match away? There was all sorts of examples of companies that had launched into the strength of a disruptive idea. But my all-time favorite is Little Mismatch, a disruptive idea the company John started, co-founded with two friends, challenged the conventional wisdom in that they sold socks that didn't match. In 2008, they launched the company with a deal with Macy's for $17 million and 150 stores. They launched in Macy's with a deal worth $17 million to sell, let's say it together, mismatched socks. Come to Jesus, man. That is just fabulous. Let me go on. So he said the problem and the solutions addressed that there are many problems, and it's exactly the point that most people in business are trained to focus on one problem, that one thing that doesn't work that needs to be fixed. A more effective starting point is to identify something in your business or industry that is not necessarily a problem, but that isn't working at its highest level. Step number one. What do you want to disrupt? Okay? Now, I'm going to actually roll this into this, right? So if you look at your life right now, and we're not looking at a business model, I'm talking about your life. If you look at your life right now, what's the thing you want to disrupt? Do you want to disrupt your pattern of relationships? Do you want to transform your prosperity consciousness? Do you want to transform your work life? What is it that you want to disrupt? Because what I want you to see is the thing that's going to disrupt your life is a little idea that changes everything. So what was the little idea with little mismatch? That you didn't have to wear matching socks. Right? Does that look like just a crazy little idea that nobody else at the dinner party believed was even possible? $17 million launch in 150 stores. Okay? Is that a radical, disruptive idea? Yes. And if it applies outside of us, what's also the spiritual truth? That it applies inside of us. So what's one idea in your life, or one area in your life, that you would be willing to disrupt? So why is your life the way it is? Anybody know? Why is your life the way it is? Because you believe that's the way it has to be. True? Because our beliefs make it so. So everything in our life is the way it is because we believe that's how it has to be. So the first question he asked, step one, what do you want to disrupt? Step two, and I'm gonna have to form it a little bit. What are the business cliches? How would you apply that to your life? What are the assumptions? What are the beliefs that are creating the reality that you want to disrupt? What are the beliefs? Because there has to be a pattern of beliefs that are creating the reality that you're living in right now. What's the idea that you want to disrupt? Or what's the belief you want to disrupt? Third, what is your disruptive hypothesis? Right? So, let me go on. Then he talks about inverting it. How can you invert it? He said, let's look at the soda industry for a moment. Inverting the soda industry. So what's the number one assumption? Is that soda is inexpensive. And two, if we inverted that, we'd have to say soda is expensive. Then he goes on. What else? That it tastes good. How many want to vote for soda tastes good? It's inexpensive and it tastes good. The two understanding beliefs, right? He said, what if it tasted terrible? Okay? Said case in point. Without going into great steps, that's exactly what Red Bull did. Red Bull, you know? It placed no importance on taste. The product is double the size of a Coca-Cola. And its marketing is absolutely the idea that it will give you a jolt. Does it care about what it costs? It's twice as much, right? And it doesn't care if you like it or not, because you're drinking it not for the taste, but for the what? the caffeine, right? The energy, the perk, right? So what I want you to see over and over again is that when we entertain an idea that disrupts our own status quo, it's always a little idea that we didn't believe was possible until we said, but what if? How many of you read The 4-Hour Work Week? Anybody read The 4-Hour Work Week? Love the book. 4-Hour Work Week. The idea is, the author's premise, his hypothesis, is what if you could work 4 hours and get everything that was important done, and you could actually increase your income working 10% of what you have been working? That's his premise, right? Is that a disruptive idea for most of us? Change my life. Think change my life, right? I read it when I was swamped in details. It changed my life. Because how many of you were taught to believe that more work equals greater income? Right? And that's the understanding. More work equals greater income. So if you're working harder, longer hours, by expectation, of course you're going to make more money. Right? But if you disrupt that thought, what if the hours that you work wasn't attached to how much you made? Well, sign me up. Right? Does that make sense? So what I want you to see is, on a spiritual level, everywhere down to practical business ideas, there are ideas that are changing the status quo in such a way that everything gets disrupted. It's a new game. So what do you want to disrupt in your life? You want greater relationships? You want greater abundance? What do you want? What do you want? What's the thing? Do you want a greater peace of mind? What do you want? What I'm going to suggest tonight, it's not going to happen the way you've been thinking about it. Because your current thinking has created that problem. And if you're going to be spiritual, we have to go down back to God, back to spirit, and say, what's the idea that would change everything? Oh, it's the Father's good pleasure to give me the kingdom. I live in an infinite universe. There's more than enough love. I can have great relationships, whatever it is. When we come back to the spiritual truth, it disrupts all of our crazy beliefs. But you have to be willing to disrupt your current thinking. Now, is there a problem with that? Yes. Your current thinking sounds good. Is it true? If it didn't sound good, you wouldn't be thinking it. Right? If you didn't believe your beliefs, you wouldn't believe them. They wouldn't be beliefs. So we actually have to entertain ourselves, put us in a spot that shakes up the apple cart so that we can have a whole new idea. So I began the year by inviting you to dwell on 3 ideas. And I know that you've all memorized those and committed those to memory, and you're practicing them. And I'll take anybody out to dinner tonight who can remember what all 3 of them are, right? All right? So do you know what the first one was? Love. Happiness was one of them. You got 1/3 of a meal. Love, happiness, and self-value. I still want you to think about those 3 ideas. I want you to pick one of them as a disruptive idea. You can decide which one. Love, happiness, or self-value. And I want you to entertain one of those as a small little grain seed of ideas that's going to disrupt everything in your life. That your soul is lovely and beautiful and fantastic, but it's not as big as it needs to be. That God has more good for you. And I want to disrupt this status. I'm already speaking in tongues, right? It's Jesus, come on, right? Right? That's why you should really never give me a week off. It's just, it resets everything. And all right? So I want you to pick one spiritual idea, a baby little spiritual idea And I want you to dwell on it. I want you to meditate on it. I want you to think about it. I want you to let it speak to you until it disrupts your whole life. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to be violent or painful, but it's going to expand your soul. It's going to take you to a new place that you've never been before. It's going to manifest the greatness of God that is within you. And it's truly amazing how one baby little spiritual idea can impact everything in your life. So do you know what your homework is? One baby spiritual idea. Take it in, dwell on it, and let it have its full effect on you. Will you pray with me? I want you to open your mind, your heart, your soul to the activity of God that is right here, right now. And Holy Spirit, we are ready to be disrupted. We are. Even though it kind of scares us even to say that out loud, we are ready to be disrupted. We are ready to overcome the lack and the limitation in the life that we've known to this point. We are ready to know the glory of God. We are ready to live a life that is so full, so rich, so blessed, so wonderful by changing some of our core beliefs. That we are not here just to hang on to old beliefs. We are here to manifest the kingdom of heaven right here, right now. And to truly live a spiritual life. So we say, yes, God, I'm ready. I'm ready. And so it is. Amen.